You think, oh, at this talk, which was at, I think, the Tucson conference on consciousness in '94, was kind of outlining things for a talk he was giving, like, okay, we've got easy problems and then the hard problem. And that just blew up, like, oh, the hard problem, you know, which is really just the problem of subjectivity, or the mind-body problem. It has various names, but yeah.
I remember somebody saying that, like, the hard problem was real, but that to solve it, it just had to be broken down into smaller soft problems. I forgot who said that.
I think that's probably one of the thinkers that maybe we covered in the first couple chapters.
Yeah, it definitely was much earlier, but I really resonated with that, because it seems like a lot of, like, what we're learning about with consciousness is, like, kind of just breaking down, like, preconceptions and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, at one point there was a hard problem of life, right? And whereas with consciousness studies we have dualism, with biology there was vitalism, right? The idea that there's a vital force, you know, a spirit to explain life. How is it alive? It's got a soul or something, right? But then we figured it out. We figured out, well, we don't really need this élan vital to explain why things are alive. So maybe we don't need a soul to explain consciousness. But there's still something mysterious there. If consciousness is a physical process, how on earth does it work? We have to break those problems down and kind of solve them one at a time, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, for the people that are online, hi. I was just saying to the people that are here in person that I think we'll try and finish off our discussion of drugs and altered states today. And the last class will be a sort of informal chit chat about what we've learned and what we think of what we've learned, and so on and so forth. So with that said, we're picking up from where we were last time on slide 7 of the slides that we started on last week. So, right, William James was talking about other forms of consciousness in the quote that we were reviewing, which we now call altered states of consciousness. I'll just call them ASCs when I think to, right? So there are lots of different altered states that we've already talked about. We already had our lecture on dreams, but there are hypnotic states, peak performance, meditation, lots of stuff. And they're all different from normal conscious experience, but they're also all different from one another. And also, what is normal conscious experience anyway? Like getting up in the morning, when you get right out of bed and you start to wake up, that's normal conscious experience. But I feel like when I did that this morning, I was less conscious than I am now that I've got here and had some coffee and I'm talking, right? So what is normal? I don't know. So how on earth do we define altered states? Is what we were talking about. Should we define them in terms of subjective, you know, the subjective experiences that they cause, or should we define them in terms of objective measures, like maybe what causes the experience? You know, what kind of substance did you take, or what kind of physiological changes does it bring about? Right? I think this is where we were last time. You know, we do this with everyday vernacular English. You know, we talk about being drunk on alcohol. You don't get drunk on marijuana, right? You get stoned. You trip on psychedelics, right? And we noted that there's the problem of subjectivity. Again, the hard problem in one form or another, right? Or really, this relates to the problem of other minds, I suppose. Right? We can consider, I don't know, say being drunk as one kind of altered state, but how do I know that my experience is the same as yours? I imagine that they're roughly the same, but are they really the same? Some people respond to different substances differently after all, right? You know, we've all maybe met that one person who has had a bit too much to drink, but feels fine and insists they can drive their car home or something, right? Whereas, oh, Ben, can I get that for you?
Oh, that was great.
Okay. No problem. Where shall I put it? I can get the cup too if you like.
No problem.
Yeah, no worries. Speaking for myself, I know that when I've had too much to drink, I'm aware of, or I tend to be pretty aware of what my limitations are. You know, I'm not going to get into a car or hop on a bicycle, but there are people that, you know, they're like, I'm fine, and they'll go and cause an accident or something. So it's crazy. We don't know. Problem of subjectivity, right?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like I have one friend who was just drunk. He's like very clearly drunk, but like he's like, no, I'm totally fine. And it's like I don't know what that would feel like to be like, because like you're acting differently.
Yeah.
You're in denial of your.
Yeah, but you think you're not. Like I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that's kind of similar to people when they have a stroke, they aren't aware of that having a stroke. Like a lot of people, they insist that they aren't having a stroke.
Oh, true.
Yeah, it depends on the stroke and where it's located, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like what's her name? Jill Bolt Taylor, I think. She's a neuroscientist.
Oh, isn't that the toast?
No.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
Toast is seizures.
Gotcha,
Burning toast is
okay.
seizures, not strokes. It's a Mandela effect thing.
Gotcha,
Yeah,
okay.
I'll explain in a moment. But Jill Bolt Taylor, I think she wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight, or she has a TED Talk. She had a stroke that caused a mystical experience. Yeah, and she had like an altered state because of this stroke, and she experienced ego death. So you should check out her TED Talk.
That TED Talk where she's talking about like trying to dial the phone.
Yeah.
And not remembering which buttons, so she's keeping her finger on the button.
Yeah, but she knew what was happening.
Yeah.
Because she was a neuroscientist, right?
Yeah, that TED Talk was really interesting.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, I'm having a stroke.
Yeah.
And then she would forget she was having a stroke.
Yeah.
Have to remember it again.
Yeah. Now I'll tell you about the burnt toast thing. It's in, for some reason in popular culture, you know, there's this trope, right? Where, oh, smell burnt toast. Are you having a stroke? I've seen that line appear in, you know, like animated sitcoms and stuff, right? But the original sort of thing, at least the first time I heard of this burnt toast thing, was actually in a Heritage Minute about Dr. Wilder Penfield, who was a Canadian neurologist, who basically was responsible for mapping, you know, the somatosensory and homunculus that we were talking about. He kind of drew that map by stimulating people's skulls or brains with electrodes. And he cured one woman's seizures, the story goes, by finding the bit of the brain where the seizures were localized. Every time the woman had a seizure, she would smell burnt toast. And it was because of activity on the cortex. So he localized this, you know, and yeah, the Heritage Minute is kind of cool. You know, he's poking around in the brain, like, what do you see now? What do you smell? And she says, I smell burnt toast, Dr. Penfield. Ooh. And they fix, you know, I guess they removed that area of the cortex and she's fine. No more seizures. So yeah, I guess you could smell burnt toast if you were having a stroke. But the original medical case, smelling burnt toast, I believe was seizures, not a stroke.
So is it even common, or was it just like a one time?
Sorry?
Like, is it common that people will like smell burnt toast when they have a seizure?
No, I think it was just a peculiarity of that medical case.
Oh, okay.
Any number of things could happen, right? Because some people, when they have seizures, they might see lights, right? There's one kind of epilepsy called ecstatic epilepsy. Dostoevsky had this. And when he had seizures, it was also kind of like an altered state. He would experience this sort of rapturous, like almost religious joy, you know, but it's a seizure. Very cool. Yeah. So that's called ecstatic epilepsy. So yeah, basically, there's lots of differences in how people react to certain substances. You know, to use the old example, you know, some people smoke marijuana and get very relaxed and giggle a lot, and some people get really anxious. So there's differences. And how much do you have to take? Some people, if they're out drinking, maybe they're what we call colloquially a lightweight, and 1 or 2 drinks and they're ready to pack it in. But some people can just keep drinking and somehow not slur their speech or something like this. Still, I wouldn't recommend getting in your car and driving home. But so defining altered states according to what causes them isn't really satisfactory for us. So maybe we could define them by physiological or behavioral changes that they cause. That would be another objective measure, right? We know that drugs do change the way our bodies and brains work. They change behavior. They change our perception. But as I think we did get to this last time, didn't we? I'm remembering now. There are not really, at least as far as we can tell, unique physiological or behavioral patterns associated with altered states, except maybe for sleep. You know, for example, say compare drinking alcohol with smoking cannabis. Both will affect working memory. Both are going to affect your judgment, right? They might cause you to feel different effects. Like subjectively, they feel different, but behaviorally, they're really not so far apart, right? So maybe we could find unique physiological patterns, but our tools lack the spatial and temporal resolution, perhaps. Maybe brains really do exhibit different activity depending on what substance you've taken, like very, very different activity, but it doesn't look that way to us now because we don't have the right tools. So objective measures would be nice, but how we tend to classify things really comes down to subjectivity and using subjective definitions. This paragraph in Blackmore, which I'll read out loud, discusses how the term altered state of consciousness came to be. She writes, the term altered state of consciousness was originally coined by American psychologist Charles Tart, and he defined it as a qualitative alteration in the overall pattern of mental functioning, such that the experiencer feels his consciousness is radically different from the way it functions ordinarily. A popular textbook says that an altered state of consciousness exists whenever there is a change from an ordinary pattern of mental functioning to a state that seems different to the person experiencing the change. And a textbook on consciousness as a temporary change in the overall pattern of subjective experience such that the individual believes that his or her mental functioning is distinctly different from certain general norms for his or her waking state of consciousness. So all of those definitions agree that altered states of consciousness involve perceived change in mental functioning, which, okay, that does seem to capture something, right? Yes.
It's sobriety an altered state of consciousness for an alcoholic?
I was wondering that too, right? You know what I was thinking? I was watching, I finally watched Euphoria on HBO. Yeah? Everybody seen that?
I have.
Yeah. I mean, it's an awfully like pretty show. Like it's art house.
Very well done.
Yeah, it's very art house. I feel like I'm watching, like, it's all about teenagers who are all like really kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah. I said to my girlfriend, I said, I feel like I'm watching Neon Genesis Evangelion without the robots. I don't know. Yeah. I know that's a bit of an obscure reference, but that's what the show felt like.
Nah, it's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, what's her name? The main character, Rue, right? Zendaya's character says something like that at some point, right? When she's trying to get sober in one of the seasons, that it's almost like a kind of high.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't seen the show, you know, Rue has like a really bad substance abuse problem. She's really, really not, yeah. It's a good show. I mean, check it out. It's pretty well done. Yeah. I think it's cool. So that got me thinking about the same thing. And I suppose that if normal means regular,
Yeah.
as opposed to normal as in maybe something, maybe like normatively, the state you ought to be in.
Your body homeostasis versus like how you generally operate.
Yeah, I suppose if you're, let's say your typical state is intoxication, I guess maybe you could make an argument.
Yeah, because there can be like a physical dependence on alcohol or like even on nicotine as well, certain cases, but like alcohol for sure that people would like die from withdrawal.
Yeah.
So like if you don't feel that or your normal state of consciousness or like you now are.
Well, it's like even if you're not drinking to the point where you're intoxicated, but maybe you're physically dependent, and you're just drinking to feel normal. You don't feel intoxicated. You're just like, I need a drink or to get rid of the shakes or something, right? So yeah, I would say in that case, totally. You could definitely make that argument. And that gets to, kind of this point that we keep coming back to, right? These definitions compare altered states with normal states of consciousness. But what is a normal state? We don't have to do this right now because we already kind of did it, but think of all of your normal states of consciousness. You're probably more conscious now that you're listening to a lecture than you were when you rolled out of bed in the morning, right? I know I am.
My 6 hours of sleep last night.
Oh, well, there. I mean, just compare today with only 6 hours with another day where maybe you get a full night's rest, right? You see? So what is normal? I don't know. Normal is still probably different for everyone, and problem of subjectivity.
That's another thing is like part of the reason why boot camps are so like intensive is because they actually found that you need to train them twice for when they have energy and for when they're tired, because being sleep deprived is an altered state. And so you actually need to go through boot camp once basically to learn how to do everything, and then twice to learn how to do everything while exhausted.
Yeah, that's why they get you to do like those big courses during training sometimes.
Yeah, they make you do a big course in the morning, and then they make you do like an engineering class.
Or even like sometimes there are exercises that are like multiple days long.
Yes.
Where you have to learn everything that you've been taught or use everything that you've been taught. But you're going to not sleep for 48 hours. So by the end of it, you're pretty, fried, right? I have a friend, I'm going to talk to him in a little bit, but yeah, he joined the military, joined the forces after high school and did the whole, like a 3-day long thing. And maybe you're lucky if you catch a little bit of sleep, but your sergeant comes and wakes you up if you fall asleep. And I was like, oh, whatever. Doesn't sound fun, but I
mean, it's also like normalization of certain conditions. So it's like, if you make it through that, there's so many other things that don't feel anywhere near as bad by comparison. Like in terms of like lengths you go to lose sleep.
Yeah.
It's like if you've been up for 45 hours straight, after that point, being up for 24 hours.
It's no problem. Yeah. It's like acclimatizing yourself, So here's another problem Blackmore writes about. Another problem is inherent in the whole idea of a subjective definition. Although defining altered states subjectively may help us to decide for ourselves whether we are in an altered state of consciousness, as soon as we try to tell other people about it, our words become just another objective behavior from their point of view. And as we said before, even when some people are in an altered state, they might report that they feel normal, even though they're not, right? So telling other people, I mean, it's kind of like, have you ever had to explain an altered state or a strange experience to somebody who hasn't had one, right? It's hard to do. And even reading about certain altered states, I'm like, what? Yeah, there's an ineffability, an ineffableness to it. Like,
for that, I usually try to find somewhere describing it that's also weird to me. When I was describing like the dissociative episode I had in like October of 2020, I described it as feeling like reality was laminated.
Yeah, interesting. That's
a good description.
It's like how people on psychedelics describe the world as like breathing, you know, which if you've never experienced that, you're probably like, what?
But like, I haven't experienced that, but that description can, like, depending on what aspects of that like concept you focus on, it can put a different set of sort of like ideas in your head that's like, I feel like I could probably get like a vague idea of it.
Yeah. And of course, trying to tell people what certain altered states are like can be done in a way that, you know, misrepresents the state. Like the clip from Reefer Madness that we saw, you know, the smoke of hell. I love that piano scene, like play faster. Like, come on. That's great. I don't know, what kind of drug would really do that? Some kind of stimulant maybe. Yeah. But even if you were on some kind of stimulant, I don't think you would be like, play faster. Like, it's just, what's that?
A gallon of coffee.
A gallon of coffee. Does anybody remember the Big Tim? Oh, it was so stupid. From Tim Hortons.
Oh, no.
It was a thermos like this.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was like this. And I knew a guy in high school, like it was supposed to be used as a thermos. You're supposed to like get 3 or 4 coffees and take to work and pour it out for your buddies, right? No. But this guy was walking around like just drinking this giant double-double.
Rat in BC that had a totem that was like a sort of French press that was like a 1.5 liter.
Oh.
And he would brew his coffee every morning, and he would just bring it to the table and sit down, and he would pour himself a cup of coffee.
Oh.
Yeah, my roommate's boyfriend has a French press. He drinks it straight out of the pitcher.
Ew.
Not straight out of the pitcher, but like he just sits with it and will fill up his cup of coffee.
I'm gonna be honest, having personal friends with the side of the thermos, like it takes a minute to register. It's weird to me because I have a lot of experience being on road trips in the middle of absolutely nowhere in the US, where I have seen at like road stops, like in places that are not even worth putting on a map. People get out of their vehicles with like one of those like borderline 2-liter like styrofoam like cups of like probably Diet Coke or something, toss it out because it's empty and buy another one at the convenience.
Oh man, ugh. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Terrifying.
Yeah. Well, maybe if you had that much coffee or that much soda with caffeine in it, you'd want to play faster.
Across the country in about 2 hours with that, right?
Yeah. But so let's get back to the problem. There's a familiar problem, that we've already noticed keeps kind of rearing its head here. Blackmore writes, you may have noticed that lurking among these problems is an old familiar one. Is there really such a thing as a conscious experience that exists apart from the things people do and the descriptions they provide of it? Or is consciousness itself just those behaviors and descriptions, as claimed, for example, by eliminative materialists and some functionalists? Right? An altered state of consciousness might be something like an epiphenomenon, right? Who cares? Consciousness, if you're an eliminative materialist, you think words like consciousness or belief or desire are not really necessary. What we need to do is just explain the brain states, like identity theory, right?
Could an altered state of consciousness like give way to qualia? Like, could altered states kind of like qualia because it's something that's like external being introduced into regular consciousness?
I think that by understanding how certain substances or even certain pieces of technology conceivably might be used to alter consciousness. Maybe I could induce an altered state with transcranial magnetic stimulation, right? Maybe that's a technique where we have a device we just kind of fix on the head, and it has like a magnetic field, and I can use it to sort of deactivate areas of the cortex for, not long, 10, 15 minutes. It's kind of like numbing your neurons, you know, almost as if like when your wrist or when your hand falls asleep, you know, it's like that, but for your brain. So maybe I could do it that way. Now we could, you know, by poking around in the brain this way, maybe we could learn something about the neural correlates of consciousness that sort of underwrite qualia, right? So maybe we could learn something like, oh, things that are visually red involve these neurons here, right? But as for why red looks the way it does and not some other way, well, hell, like, I don't know. That's the hard problem, right? So, yeah, eliminative materialists and some functionalists like Dennett. Dennett would be some functionalist. The eliminative materialist would be identity theorists like Patricia or Paul Churchland, right? The Churchlands are identity theorists who say that mental states are just brain states. So we don't need mental terms. We can reduce it and eliminate. So it's a kind of reductionism. I think we can learn something about qualia from altered states, though. But maybe if physicalism is correct, if we exhaust all of our objective measures, then we'll explain altered states. And we'll have explained normal consciousness too. But there is something, as you say, ineffable about altered states, just like there is something about non-altered states, right? Both, any kind of conscious state, whether it's altered or normal, is qualia laden. Let's go back to this old chestnut. Frank Jackson, Mary the color scientist. If you want to kind of understand these two possibilities, rerun this thought experiment. But instead of Mary being a scientist with knowledge about color, Mary is a scientist with knowledge of mind-altering drugs. Now, Mary's in a room where she's in the sober room, right? This is my little spin that I'm putting on this. I don't know if anyone else has done this before. If they have, sorry, but you know, don't want to steal anybody's ideas. But I was thinking about this, where we have Mary, the drug scientist, in the sobriety room, where there are no drugs, but and she's raised there her whole life, you know, just sober with nothing. But she has complete knowledge of the neurophysiology of drugs. So when Mary steps out of the room and smokes like a big joint or something for the first time, will she be surprised at how it feels to be stoned? Your answer to that tells you where you sit. If Mary knows all of the objective facts, all of the physical facts, she would be able to say, like, you know, oh yeah, this is what it's like to be stoned. But if you switched with tobacco, she could tell the difference, like, oh, hey, hang on, I know that's not marijuana, right? So
just a slight comparison though, wouldn't learning all like the facets of drugs be like learning how to listen to a record by looking at the bumps in the groove? You're not actually listening to the music, you're just building an approximation. And so I feel like Mary would have an approximation, but like she's just reading the music by looking at the bumps in the groove. Well, how much actually listening to it?
Right, but how much are we allowing Mary to know, right? We have to, for the thought experiment to work, we have to allow that Mary can know everything there is to know about, you know, grooves on a record or drugs or colors, whatever qualia kind of thing we're experimenting with, right?
We're also assuming that Mary, the drug scientist, knows that she's had interviews with people that have done drugs before. So I guess that she could kind of approximate her own experience of drugs. But also, I have another twist to this. What if it's Mary, the color scientist, on drugs? Would she know what's up with color? You put Mary on a bunch of acid.
I think if we allow Mary to have complete knowledge of neuroscience and of the physics of color, then if we really follow the rules, then yeah, Mary, she would know like this is red normally and this is red on acid, right?
This is your brain normally.
Yeah, like the egg, that old thing. That, oh man, like what was that? I mean, I always thought that commercial was silly. The one we watched, you know.
That's someone who has it. Like,
yeah, because like this is your brain. Okay, my brain's a raw egg, you know. Oh, here it is on drugs.
No,
Well, yeah, I don't want to eat a raw egg. This is a good egg. So
the takeaway here.
The takeaway is do drugs.
The takeaway is that drugs make you edible.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you mentioned something last time where you were thinking like, oh, I want an egg now. And
yeah.
When I watched that, that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, man, I didn't eat lunch. I want an egg.
I'm hungry.
Also, at the end, he goes, any questions?
I have lots of questions. Yeah, I have many.
Drugs make you edible.
Yeah.
I go out of my way to act on this information.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's all because, you know, in the United States, in the early 20th century, you know, they went through a period of prohibition, right?
Woo, I'm from the state that's responsible for that.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, Kansas.
Yeah.
Prohibition.
And a lot of places, you know, if you wanted a drink, you'd have to go to a speakeasy, right? Which was one of those kind of underground secret things. And there are like tunnels in some of the old buildings in older cities. Really cool stuff. But prohibition didn't work. So eventually when alcohol was decriminalized again, or re-legalized, whatever you want to say, all these people under the command of under the direction of one Harry J. Anslinger, had nothing to do. They would have lost their jobs unless they found something else to do. So what did they do? They started to prosecute marijuana and marijuana offenses, and eventually other things too. Because you got to remember, before prohibition, you could go to the pharmacy and buy hashish. You could buy opium. You could buy cocaine. Coca-Cola. You know, everybody knows Coca-Cola used to have cocaine in it. That's where the name comes from. Coca from the coca plant, and cola from the cola nut, which is where the caffeine came from.
That's crazy.
And it used to come as a syrup. Yeah, it's crazy. It used to come as a syrup. And in each little glass bottle of Coke, there would be like 3.5 grams of cocaine. Like, that's a lot of cocaine. I don't know if you know, but that's a lot. Like, so, and people were like, yeah, get your, you know, have some Coke, get the spring in your step.
The whole like cool off, have a Coke makes a lot. It just means a lot different things when it's like, oh, you're addicted to this. Cool off, have a Coke.
And you know the really weird part is the guy who invented Coca-Cola did it because he was trying to cure his morphine addiction.
Yeah.
So like, oh, maybe I'll get addicted to something else. You know, I don't know. It's crazy. So I don't understand. I think it's strange. This whole drug prohibition thing is actually quite recent in human history, I guess is the point I'm trying to make, because humans have been altering their consciousness for thousands of years.
Year predates written records.
Yeah.
Developed independently in every part of the planet.
Exactly. Every early civilization figured out how to brew alcohol. And the ones that didn't, oh, well, they had something else. Like in North America, right? The Indians, the Mesoamerican cultures, right? Didn't have alcohol, but they did chew.
Well, it's more specifically North America that alcohol, like as we think of it, wasn't really present. In like where the Aztecs and the Mayans were, they did. What they made is like form the basis of what is now like tequila.
Oh, of course, yeah, from the agave plant.
Yeah,
yeah.
So, like, in North America, yeah, they didn't have like alcohol, but like tobacco and other substances.
Yeah.
Like,
and also like cacao as well.
Yeah, well, the Aztecs, for example, would chew coca leaf with cacao and get like a buzz on. Yeah, caffeine, cocaine buzz.
What I find really neat about that though is that even when society didn't have like alcohol per se, they had other substances. Those substances would usually fill a very similar zone.
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
As Silken says, in Mexico we had is that pulque? Is that how to say that?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's how you pronounce it.
Nice. What is that? Is that an alcoholic drink?
Yeah, it's made from a fermented sap of the maguey, which is
Ooh.
like agave. So
Okay.
yeah, that's one alcoholic beverage we used to have.
That sounds interesting. I should try that if I'm ever.
You should.
I do like tequila for real. Like I think if I'm gonna do a shot, I want it to be tequila, but you know, I try not to do too much of the drinking.
But you know, there's this wrong idea that tequila has to be like a drunk, sorry, like in a shot. But
yeah, you can sip it.
Mainly, yeah, it's mainly made to be like sipped.
Yeah, and that's, you know, I guess I'm not a big hard liquor guy, which is why I've tried sipping. I wanted to be sophisticated, so I tried to drink scotch. I'm like, I can't do it.
No.
It's gross. Give me like a nice beer, a dark beer, or a glass of red wine with a nice meal. That's what I want. I don't want to sip on scotch and be sophisticated.
But yeah, speaking of whiskey, I was going to say, I think my favorite fun fact is between the Irish invention of whiskey and every other invention, there's a 300-year gap where Ireland didn't invent anything. At least like notably. So like in the 1600s, they found out whiskey, and then the next invention was in the 1800s.
Wow.
They were like, all right, guys, we peaked. We're just going to hang out here for a while. We're good.
Well, and it's interesting because, you know, there are some cultures where people don't alter their consciousness at all, where it is discouraged from altering your consciousness at all with substances, right?
Well, I know in Islam they have
Exactly. And so, what's that? Yeah, well, yeah.
There's like that one exception.
Yeah, and coffee.
Yeah.
Tea and coffee. So caffeine and nicotine,
and
they're fine.
The Mormons
but
don't like coffee.
I've had Mormon family, or not Mormon family members, but Mormon friends who, like, their family will not let them drink soft drinks, will not let them drink coffee.
Yeah. It's true. It's crazy. But the reason why I bring up Islam is because, yeah, as you say, like some mild stimulants we can say are fine. And it's not as if that they didn't have alcohol. The word alcohol is an Arabic word, right? It's not that they didn't have it, but alcohol was used for maybe making perfume or something like that, right? It wasn't like something you would consume, because if you alter your consciousness this way, you might do something. You might make an ass of yourself, right?
Pre-Islam, I think they still drank it. Because I think the Quran is mentioned that it's a slow implementation to put it out.
Yeah.
Which some people use as an argument to take alcohol for people.
And it makes sense, because in that area, like, alcohol had been around. You know, it's not like
Jesus was like, yo, I just turned some water. Alcohol.
Or his blood is wine, or something if you're Catholic. So it's very weird. But that's interesting. But the other interesting thing about Islam is that, you know, for example, in the Sufi tradition, you know, you might alter your consciousness by dancing or chanting, right?
That's a funny thing, because in like Arab societies, for Islam, they always do that. But like, because I grew up in Malaysia, our version of Islam like completely discourages any form of singing and dancing. Like it's wrong.
I've heard that. Yeah, depending on who you ask, music is either like completely haram, so it's like forbidden, or only music that's not like profane, so no swear words or anything.
Because like when my family comes to Dubai, there's like a
we always go for these big festival things, and one of the times we went for a safari, and there was some elephants there.
Oh.
And my entire family was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And all the elephants were happy. I was like, yeah, this is amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, it's interesting, like how, you know, different things kind of branch out and change as they spread. It's neat, but I bring it up just because I think that's an interesting example of a kind of altered state. You know, I don't know, Islam is kind of the exception when it comes to consuming stuff to make you change your perception, right? Unless it's medicine, right? You can take it, you could take morphine if it's medicine, that's okay. But you can't take it to get, you know, messed up. Don't do that. You shouldn't do that.
I think it relates to this slide where it's still like very core scientists as well. Because like even if we know right now what, like Coca-Cola, for example, cocaine and coffee, and caffeine. Like even if you know what both those do to your brain, it's still, you still won't like experience what it's like, you know?
Yeah.
So I think like even if she knew what it would do, like she could know exactly what would happen to her. And like she would be able to describe how she would feel, but she wouldn't actually feel it until she did it, you know?
Yeah, that's an interesting, yeah. Like like she could say, well, I would feel this way.
Yeah.
But I'm not feeling this way now.
I think I think I agree with you on this one.
Yeah.
Like this is the way that I see it.
It's like, I think when we were talking about this thought experiment initially, we mentioned that maybe we're dealing with two different kinds of knowledge. You know, knowledge about physical facts is propositional knowledge. It's knowledge that, right? So Mary knows that such and such a wavelength of light will create such and such a qualia of redness or blueness or whatever, right? But then there's also knowing how it feels. So maybe there's two different kinds of knowledge, and physical knowledge is not exhaustive, but that doesn't mean there's something magical going on.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe I saw something on IFL Science a little while ago talking about how physicists were thinking that maybe there is a fifth state of matter. You know, we have four states of matter, right? Solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. So those are the four states that matter can exist in. But there's talk in the philosophy of physics of introducing a fifth state, information. Now, physicists mean something different by information than philosophers and cognitive scientists do. When we talk about information, usually we're talking about information that's represented, like a mental representation or the information in my computer, right? But when physicists say information, they mean what the actual things are doing. So I'm still not sure if I understand correctly what they're proposing, but if information were another state of matter, then that might open the door to some kind of property dualism.
Kind of similar to how like trees communicate. Like, would that be like an exchange of information? It's not necessarily like a representation.
Well, no, that would be representation. The chemical signals.
Okay.
The medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan would have said.
The information, right? Like the information, like could that be kind of what explains like?
Well,
like not necessarily the heart problem, but like the mind-body problem, or like where it comes together.
Well, that's the thing. Like my neurons, at least this is how we think of it, are representing information that's not about the neurons, right? But with a tree, you know, it's similar. I don't know if there's anything that it's like to be a tree, but there is information being exchanged in the sense that if a tree is getting more nutrients from another tree, that's because that tree needs it. And it's really hard to like, geez, I really can't do this justice without explaining a whole bunch of stuff about like dynamics and.
Is it a physical or non-physical property of a certain like state of matter? We're talking about the four regular states. Non-physical.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure if I understand what exactly they're proposing, because information in the usual sense in physics is just what everything is doing.
Right.
It's what we would call the world.
Information is like its state.
Isn't it like just?
Well, no, I mean, maybe.
In computer science, the way we describe state, I guess this is a little different from physics, but like the state is the base level that everything starts at.
Yeah, but information ultimately in computer science is still representation.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
You know, information is zeros and ones, which represent truth values, true and false.
Yeah,
right?
Literally truth values.
Yeah,
in that case, so.
yeah. So I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing. Maybe that opens the door to property dualism. And so there are physical properties and informational properties. And the informational properties might be what explain subjective experience. Maybe. Don't think we've solved it. We haven't figured it out, but maybe.
Wait, is that just like, you know, like
it's property dualism. Yeah. Yeah. So there's no like spirit or thinking substance, but mind and matter are two sides of the same metaphysical coin. So it's property dualism. There's only physical stuff, but it has physical and mental properties.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I don't kind of like
that's a worry. That's a worry, yeah, because I mean, yeah, panpsychism is a little magical. It's cool, but it's magical, you know?
So if you have these like two sides of the same coin, and like I know this isn't a given, but like if we the world is its own best model, and if we try to look at it with that like two-sided coin, how would you reconcile the fact that like the world would be its own best model, but then you're also maintaining this like dual? Well,
I don't think if we're talking about the kinds of representations that we are talking about here, like mental representations, then
it wouldn't be.
Well, then we're not using the world as its own model, right? Because that's the new skepticism. That's an activism.
Gotcha. Yeah,
whereas, you know, this if all this experience is a representation being generated by my brain, well, then this is the grand illusion, right? That's what that means.
Okay. Gotcha.
So yeah. Okay, I don't want to run out of time. This is really good discussion, but let's try and make it to the end of these slides. We've already seen that, you know, asking what's changed between an altered state and a normal state is uninformed. If we answer consciousness has changed, it's uninformative. It reminds me of the beer taste thought experiment from Dennett, right? Beer is an acquired taste, so the experienced beer drinker didn't like beer, but now he does. Well, what changed? Did the taste of the beer change? No. You know, what changed? My consciousness. Well, okay, yeah, but how? And this is all very difficult, right? In theory, studying how altered states differ from normal states of consciousness should tell us something about how consciousness really works. But we don't know how to study consciousness in isolation from other cognitive and perceptual functions like memory or, you know, or perceiving the environment or anything like that. So maybe we have to just try and study how certain mental functions, that's the key word from all those definitions that we went over here, mental functions, let's study how those change along with our phenomenal experience. Here's all of the mental functions or types of mental functioning that Tart describes. He calls, you know, he says if any of one of these change, you know, in a way that, you know, in a way that, like as the quote says here, that there's a qualitatively distinct pattern of mental functioning, you know, say an attention between the altered state and the normal state. Well, that's how we got to explain it. These are all of the mental functions that we might observe such changes in during an altered state. There's attention, perception, imagery, and fantasy. So we're talking about the imagination here. Inner speech, memory, high-level thought processes, meaning and significance, time perception, emotional feeling and emotional expression, arousal, self-control, suggestibility, body image, and your sense of personal identity. It's a lot. It's very comprehensive, but it's a lot. This is why this is hard, because altered states could involve a change in all of those mental functions or just some of them, right? So do we need to understand the whole system of mental functions before we can understand altered states? That seems like a tall order, right? We don't understand all of those when it comes to normal states of consciousness. So maybe we should just pick a few mental functions. Ones that are usually impacted when we're having an altered state of consciousness are attention, memory, and arousal. Think about it. If you have an altered state, depending on the substance that you've taken, your attention will change. I mean, if you smoke cannabis, that will impact your working memory, but it won't affect your semantic memory or your long-term memory or your autobiographical memory. So what that means is you might be smoking some weed with your friends, and maybe you'll be having a conversation and all of a sudden you'll forget what you were talking about, right? This happens from time to time. Like, what was I talking about, man? But you don't forget who you are, and you don't forget maybe what you were doing earlier that day, right? So yeah, attention, memory, and arousal is like energy levels, mental or physical. So how awake and alert am I, right? Obviously, some substances change this differently. You know, central nervous system stimulants increase arousal. Central nervous system depressants decrease it. So if you have, you know, one of those old-timey Coca-Colas with all of the cocaine in it, then we're going to be talking about very high levels of arousal. If you have alcohol, your levels of arousal are going to decrease. So let's iterate through all three of these a little more slowly. Attention. Attention can change along two dimensions. Our attention can be directed outward, or it could be directed inward. So that's one dimension. Or it could be focused broadly or narrowly. So think of the spotlight of attention in the global workspace theory, for example. Blackmore says that changes in attention can profoundly affect subjective states, but the effects cannot be cleanly separated from the associated changes in perception, memory, and emotion. And that's what I was kind of getting at with my cannabis example, right? Attention and memory seem to be kind of coupled together in a certain sense in altered states. If your attention is affected, your memory is going to be affected, at least in the sense that if you're not attending to something, you're not going to remember it. Maybe you're smoking weed with your friends and you're watching videos on the internet or something, right? But you get distracted by your, I don't know, your hands. So, or maybe you're thinking, your attention is focused inward and you're feeling some anxiety and thinking about all these thoughts. You're not going to remember any of the videos that are being played, right? So inward, outward, focus broadly or narrowly. Memory. Memory changes happen a lot with different altered states. And memory changes are linked to changes in other mental functions as well, like thinking or experiencing emotions. Oh, excuse me. So lots of mind-altering substances affect working memory. I already said, you know, cannabis will affect your working memory, but it does not seem to affect your episodic and semantic memory. So you might forget what you were talking about, but you won't forget what you were doing up until that point. And you won't forget who you are or where you go to university or anything important like that. So, and this has some curious effects, right? Maybe it's hard to have a conversation or read a book if you've smoked cannabis, but it also might make you focus on the present. So maybe it would make for a really nice walk outside, or just sit out under a tree and listen to the birds. You know, that would probably be very pleasant. And of course, changes in memory can affect the subjective passage of time. Drugs may affect your memory in such a way that it feels like a lot of time has passed, but really it's only been a few minutes. Or it might make it seem like time is going by really, really fast. Or really, really slowly. Oh, I said the same thing. No, what have I, oh, did I get that wrong? No, I need to edit my slides more. You know what I'm saying though. Sometimes drugs can make a long time seem short or a short time seem long. That's what I'm trying to say. And finally, arousal. Altered states that lower levels of arousal that don't have anything to do with substances are, of course, meditative states, sleep, hypnotic states. You lower your level of arousal. Central nervous system depressants, so alcohol, but also sedatives. So sedatives make you really like relaxed. Oh, no problem. If you're still there, Sarah, no problem. She has to leave. Bye. You can watch the rest on the internet. Sedatives are like relaxers, you know, calm the nerves. Benzodiazepines are given for people who experience acute anxiety, for example, right? Narcotics. Narcotics are things that make us feel sleepy and dull pain. So morphine is the classic narcotic. Morphine occurs naturally in, you know, opium that's taken from poppies. It was used in medicine and recreationally for thousands of years. Morphine, the name comes from which Greek god? Yes, exactly. The god of sleep and dreams.
Wait, there actually was a Greek god named Morpheus?
Yes. Morpheus, yeah, we talked about this in the dream lecture. Morpheus means shaper of form.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So Morpheus sends dreams to you, shapes the
My
form.
brain can't get over the Matrix style.
Yeah, no, it's good. Also, The Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Oh, that's a great book.
You have to read that. I should make that required reading.
I'm also a huge fan of Sandman.
Yeah, it's so good. And they're making a Netflix show.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in development hell for a long time, making a movie, which I'm glad, like, don't make a movie. You can't make a movie out of that. I think so.
And I was watching an interview with him, and apparently, like, it's been tied to a bunch of like famous actors in the past. It's going like Leonardo DiCaprio and like Brad Pitt, like. Yeah,
Joseph Gordon-Levitt most recently, and it's never worked. And I think that's because Neil Gaiman would rather not have it made, like not have a bad Sandman show made.
Yeah.
Wait, what is the Sandman? What's the book?
So it's a graphic novel about a character who's called Morpheus. And he is an anthropomorphic personification of dreams.
Oh.
Yeah, and he rules the dream domain, and he has some brothers and sisters too. So like Death, his older sister is Death. She's basically like a goth looking Grim Reaper, right? Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of good stuff. It's very cool. It's like postmodern magic realism. Vertigo, actually, which is DC. Yeah.
I was gonna say a good comparison, I think, is Old Gods. If anybody's seen that, like, not a strong comparison, but
yeah,
it has the same theme of like these mystical things exist in real life.
Yeah, it's like that. It's very much like that. So anyway, that's just a good reading recommendation for you. It's I think it's like a 10 or 11 volume graphic novel series, and it's probably one of the best things I've ever read. So yeah, it's good.
Oh, it's like the whole comic book collection from like the 20s.
Oh, so you've got the single issue ones.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
They're all like double, with double sleeve and everything.
Yeah, that's cool. Mine are just the collected volumes, but it's good stuff. Very good story. So, okay, yeah, morphine, Morpheus, that whole thing. Anesthetics, like ketamine. These are used for, you know, to put you under when you're having surgery or something, right? But at low doses, ketamine kind of acts a little bit like a psychedelic. The same can be true of certain stimulants. Oh, I don't have stimulants here. Where are the stimulants? Oh, here they are. So when we're talking things that raise levels of arousal, we're talking spiritual or religious frenzy, like, you know, like the Sufis. Again, I think in the 19th century, this is an unfortunate term, but you guys are all familiar with the term Orientalism, right? Yeah, it's kind of like an othering thing that Europeans did a lot.
Where the sun rises and where the sun sets.
Yeah, well, basically the reason why we don't, you know, use the term anymore is because the Orient referred to everything from Turkey to Japan.
Not Europe, but East.
And yeah, and you know what? Like, it's a big place, and a lot of different people live there. So we shouldn't. Yeah, so maybe they're not all, you know, that's why we don't do that anymore. But back then, the Westerners had this idea of the Sufi as the whirling dervish, right? Because, yeah, it's true. They called them the whirling dervishes. It's not really a term. Now we just say Sufis. But that's because they would spin around.
Oh.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of do this, not going around the Kaaba in Mecca, but like the actual Sufis who will dance and chant and spin around, and they alter their consciousness this way. Or probably the best example, you ever see those faith healers on television, those Christian faith healers?
Yeah.
And they do the laying.
They go into the big.
Yeah.
Get so into themselves that they're like kind of chanting on TV.
Well, they speak in tongues.
Yeah.
Which is not a real language, right? But you know how have you ever heard someone speaking in tongues?
Yeah.
It's weird, right? It's nonsense words.
It's kind of like parcel tongue in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Pretend to speak demon as best as you can without being fluent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They say it's the Holy Spirit communicating through them, but we've looked at the speech patterns, the phonemes, and it's not a language. It's just like rush, like it's very interesting. Like, I'm not religious, so you know, these are all really interesting to me because they're like, you know, these are interesting things people do, and I want to understand them, you know, in this way, right?
How we could just do that to ourselves. It's like,
yeah. But think about it. We convince ourselves of all kinds of things all the time, right? Yeah. So there's that. There's like, you know, the sometimes even you don't have to be touching. They do the laying on of hands, but there's some videos you can find of these preachers going, you know, like, I'm pointing to someone in the audience, and the guy in the audience will, you know, fall over, like, get hit by the Holy Spirit. But if you're talking stimulant drugs, they do the same thing. They raise levels of arousal, sometimes moderately. So caffeine, and then I love caffeine. What would I do? I used to work at Tim Hortons.
Oh my.
You know, I was drinking so much coffee that I think I was probably putting my life in danger. Like, like throughout an 8-hour shift, like every hour. As soon as my coffee got cold, I'd go get another one.
Oh God.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then when I stopped working there, which was just before COVID, thank goodness. Could you imagine? Oh yeah, no.
Were you at least getting decaf, or was it like the whole thing?
It was full on
Oh,
medium roast.
damn.
Yeah. And my stomach hurt after a while.
Yeah, no wonder.
Yeah. So now I can have maybe 1 or 2 cups a day. And if I have like a third cup, I'll get like, you know, like I get really antsy.
Yeah, if I'm on second cup of coffee, it feels like my intestines are melting. I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm like, I need to do something. I'm like, this is how I imagine methamphetamine feels.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I'm like, oh, you know, like, so.
That's such an opposite effect with caffeine that I feel like I'm maybe not taking caffeine better.
Maybe our brains are all wired differently, and some people, caffeine can make you sleepy.
Yeah, that happened. I did
Yeah.
do a full shutdown.
I was gonna say, like, one of the struggles with ADHD has been like caffeine doesn't wake me up.
Yeah.
Like, I think I mentioned this last time, but I drink like 2 or 3 cups of coffee before I go to bed and stuff like that. Because it's a warm drink that helps me sleep, and caffeine doesn't work.
Interesting. Silken asks, would it be like drinking Red Bull? Yeah. Now, if I have 1 or 2 cups of coffee, it feels like I've had like an energy drink.
Yeah, 1 cup of coffee and I get jittery.
Yeah.
I need to
But
caffeine.
what's that?
Caffeine's like actually the serious addiction.
Oh yeah, it can be. Like the physical symptoms of caffeine dependence are not that severe, but you can drink too much. And if you do it you know, caffeine can kill you if you have enough of it. There was a story in the news a few years ago, you know, talking about cough syrup and Jolly Ranchers. I've got one for you. It was where in a university, you know, these people were your age. They were having a party, I guess, and buddy brings over caffeine powder.
Four Loco.
Yeah, I don't know what it.
Four Loco is like, I think 9% plus energy, and in a concert size camp.
Oh my, yeah. Well, this was in a powder form, right? And they snorted it like cocaine.
Oh my.
And I do believe that the kid died, like because caffeine will, if you have too much, it'll just destroy your kidneys, and yeah, probably not good for your heart either. So you know, caffeine we generally drink in small amounts, safe amounts. Nicotine doesn't affect arousal levels very significantly in small amounts, but it is highly addictive. And not to mention the fact that in cigarettes, which is the primary way that nicotine is consumed, at least here in North America and throughout Europe, there's also a lot of preservatives that are just sprayed onto the tobacco. Now, these things are preservatives that are safe in food and drink, but when you light them on fire, they produce a lot of carcinogens. So, and also they have some of the effect of some of the effects of cigarettes is not nicotine. It's these poisonous fumes you're breathing.
I imagine to some degree they have similar effects to like.
It's like huffing paint.
Yeah, I was about to say,
Yeah.
things like blue paint.
Like if I have, you know, after class, I'm a little bit like, oh, I've got to go have a vape, you know, and I have a vape, and then I like, I feel better. But if I go and have a cigarette, I'm like, ugh, like I'm dizzy. I feel kind of like queasy. Yeah. Yeah. Like after I get that initial buzz, I immediately like, oh, you go up and you crash. Which is
that's just me on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Whatever do a cigarette.
Yeah, no, don't smoke. Like I said before, taking up smoking was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Okay, and I just don't do it. And don't start vaping either. This is harm reduction for me. This isn't like, I'm not like one of those vape cloud chaser guys. Vape Nate ripping the fat clouds.
Thinking that you could quit smoking.
Yeah, because you can't.
Yeah, no, I was literally like, I'm gonna start smoking because I want to show my dad that I can quit smoking.
Yeah, no, don't.
And it took an extra year. I quit smoking before my dad, but why did I start?
Yeah, why? Don't do it. Just don't. And don't do amphetamines or cocaine either, because holy moly, those things are not good for your brain. Amphetamines, like I mentioned before, these include speed, crystal meth, and MDMA. In World War II, the Brits were taking amphetamines. We talked about this. The Germans were taking Pervitin, which you could buy at the pharmacy. Pervitin was crystal meth in pill form. Nowadays, amphetamines are often prescribed for ADHD, right? And maybe this is why some people get sleepy when they have coffee, because ADHD brains are a little different than neurotypical brains. My partner has ADHD. She was actually just diagnosed, you know, and an ADHD brain needs more dopamine to stay interested in stuff, right? Yeah. Now the treatment for ADHD is oftentimes a slow release stimulant, right? It's not like doing a street drug. You know, you don't snort it up your nose and instantly feel like you're going to conquer the world. It's slow release. But what it does is it gets your brain, which maybe doesn't have enough dopamine, gets enough dopamine going in there to keep you interested in things. Whereas maybe a neurotypical brain, they've already got their pleasure reward system is okay, and they have no problem paying attention.
As I explained why my coffee habit is the way it is, like especially my time here, I usually only drink like a single cup of coffee a day. I get like coffee and I put those like crappy little plastic cups in the cap.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed when I have stuff I need to do, if I don't have coffee and I'm tired, I just don't do anything. Like I'm inactive. Whereas if I have coffee, my level of energy is usually like not super different, but I'm productive.
Yeah. That's actually like a very good example. That's why I have this can of like orange crush right here. It's literally
a king can.
Yeah, to help me pay attention in class, I have some orange juice.
Yeah.
Orange juice, and it helps me learn.
Yeah.
Don't know why it works.
Well, it tastes good.
Yeah.
And you're probably getting a little pleasure reward response whenever you take a sip, because it's really sweet.
Another afternoon at the library after this class, and I'm thinking about stopping down at the Timmy's on campus to get some coffee.
Yeah.
Do it. Real quick, I think we can finish these slides. One interesting thing there's about MDMA is, and Blackmore talks a lot about this in later on in the chapter, is that it does also have some psychedelic properties. It is chemically a stimulant, but not only does it block serotonin reuptake, it also increases serotonin and dopamine production.
Yeah.
Most stimulants are dopamine, like cocaine blocks dopamine reuptake.
It like uses it all up at like one time.
Sorry?
Isn't it like basically like use up all of the dopamine?
Well, no, it kind of like fits into the molecule fits in where the dopamine molecule would. So your brain goes, oh, well, I don't need to have any more dopamine because there's all this cocaine. And that's why the next day, as Robin Williams said, Robin Williams struggled with cocaine addiction for years. That's why the next day after a cocaine binge, he said, you wake up feeling like a vampire with a day pass because your brain has not replenished that dopamine. MDMA does that, but also serotonin. And serotonin receptors are also what are implicated in psychedelic drugs and their mechanisms of action. So for example, psilocybin and LSD and DMT all work on serotonin receptors. So, and that's also why if you're on certain forms of medication, like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, you need to be very careful with psychedelics. You know, mushrooms may be okay, although I'm not that kind of doctor, so this is not medical advice. But I've seen on documentaries and read reports of, you know, people who are on these antidepressant medications. They'll do MDMA or ayahuasca, which has DMT in it, and they will have a seizure, you know. So again, you know, I'm not a medical doctor, but I know everybody's kind of at that age in college. So, you know, if you're going to do anything, you need to be very careful about what you're already doing. Otherwise, you could damage your brain. Seizures can cause brain damage. So, you know, don't do that. Anyway, maybe if we follow Blackmore's lead here, what does she say? She ends this section by saying, thinking about these three variables, attention, memory, arousal. What were the other ones? Arousal, memory. Oh, yeah, okay. Still works. Thinking about these three variables, we might imagine some kind of three-dimensional space in which different altered states of consciousness can be positioned, or more realistically, a very complex multidimensional space or phenospace. Whoops, sorry, I missed the line there. A very complex multidimensional space within which all possible altered states might be found. A phenomenal state space, or a phenospace, as Thomas Metzinger calls it. If states of consciousness could be accurately mapped within such a space, we might understand how each relates to the others, how each can be induced, and how to move from one state to another. But although many attempts have been made, the task is not easy.
Is basically what he's proposing like a color grid, but of mental states?
Yeah, like, well, we'll see next time, but basically we can imagine, like Charles Tart has a two-dimensional phenospace that looks like this, and it just has a, like, I think he has a ability to hallucinate, so let's call that H, and irrationality, so we'll call that I, and we can plot, you know, irrationality and ability to hallucinate, so maybe dreams, right?
Yeah, so you can
So
get
dreams are here.
Rational hallucinations.
Yeah, but maybe lucid dreams would be here, right? And then
like creative imagination, or
yeah. Well, the thing about Tart, and again, we're going to talk about this next time, but
yeah, of course, yeah.
Oh, it's wet again. I don't know.
I mean, it cleans out the chalkboard, so
That's weird.
This is so weird. It's so weird. It's too wet.
Self-lubricating.
Yeah, that's so weird. So, we'll get into this. This is what we'll be talking about next time, and we'll probably not do the final section, which is like, here's some interesting drugs, because we've kind of been doing that as we've gone, right? So we'll just cover these sort of maps of this phenospace. The slides are already available for this if you want to take a look. And then we'll just have a little wrap up discussion, talk about what we've learned, reflect on it, maybe talk about whether we want to keep studying consciousness or whether it's all too perplexing and better not to. So thanks everyone, and thanks everybody who joined us online. And I'll see you next, I'll see you on Friday for our last class. I can't believe it. Last class already. It's nuts.
Are you teaching any courses next?
Yeah, I'm teaching neuroscience in the early summer. And then I'm teaching philosophy of the paranormal in late summer. I highly recommend. What's that?
I'll keep an eye out for that latter one.
Yeah, I highly recommend philosophy of the paranormal. It's really cool.
I had a friend, their name was Wash. They took philosophy of the paranormal with you. They really liked it.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm going to be changing it up a little bit. Oh, bye, everyone.